Obamacare. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Stupid people are ruining America.
The president just wants to take care of you. He just doesn't think you're able to do it for yourself.
There's a very thin line between communism, progressivism, Marxism, socialism.
The empire will strike back.
You still don't know that this was political.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of America Our Way. I am your host, Dustin Hoyt. Hope you've all had a great week. Got a lot to talk about today, a lot going on in the news. You've got the Supreme Court making decisions. You've got some federal agencies up to no good in Texas. Got gun laws being passed in Georgia. It's been a pretty eventful week so far, and we got a lot to talk about. Now, I want to start off with the BLM thing. Now, BLM's Bureau of Land Management, it's the federal bureau that is in charge of managing all federally owned public, I use that term loosely, properties. Now, we had a long talk last week about the BLM in Nevada. As you all remember, Cliven Bundy is a rancher in Bunkerville, Nevada. His family has been grazing cattle on public land for over 100 years. And 10 years after the BLM was actually formed. Now, his family has come under scrutiny and has gotten lots of media attention after the federal government swooped in with all sorts of armed teams and decided to start confiscating his cattle because he wasn't paying federal grazing fees, and refused to comply with a lot of these regulations because he says that they were trying to regulate him out of his livelihood. Now, this whole situation hasn't developed too much, but that same organization is involved in stuff in Texas. There has been a dispute for over 100 years about the Texas-Oklahoma border. It was largely resolved about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. For those of you who aren't familiar, the northern border of Texas, the crooked border it shares with Oklahoma, not the panhandle, is marked by the Red River. Now, the Red River obviously doesn't run in a straight line because it's not a straight border, but there was a lot of dispute over that border, especially when oil was found in North Texas, and the government stepped in and was trying to kind of mitigate the thing. There's lots of court cases and stuff like that. Now, this was further complicated by Indian tribes that are right on that border there. For those of you who don't know, a big chunk of southern Oklahoma that shares that Red River border is Indian territory. And so the Indians naturally had a claim to a lot of these riverlands. And some were claiming that the oil was being pumped from their land as well as the Texas land, and even went as far as claiming some of the oil wells that were put in the river. And so this whole debacle was a big deal, and the BLM was, if I'm not mistaken, the federal government was saying, this needs to be handled. And so while George W. Bush was governor of Texas, there were two commissions that were put out, one in Oklahoma and one in Texas, and they came to an agreement on where the border would lie. And so it's no longer under dispute. And the conclusion they came to is that the northern border of Texas is the vegetation line on the southern part of the river. Now, that's important because Governor Perry and Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst in Texas have thrown a fit, and Greg Abbott has even written a letter to the BLM because there's a process going on, a committee oversight thing. Not even oversight. They're looking into what to do with the land. They're talking about it, doing research. And Texans own deeds to a lot of the land in question. And so this has raised all sorts of questions about government overreach. Now, Greg Abbott sent a strongly worded letter to the federal government, the BLM, saying, what is it that you think you're doing? Where is your legal precedent to own or use any of this land? Provide it for us. Let us know what you're planning on doing, where you're planning on doing it, who you're planning on doing it with. because we're probably going to take your butt to court. Now, Greg Abbott says that they've got a leg to stand on and that, he'll defend the Texas property owners, etc. at all infinitum. Now, I want you to understand, I agree with what Greg Abbott is saying. I agree that Texas landowners who own deeds to this land and have these deeds have been around for at least 100 years. And there's a whole lot of history that goes into this. It's a lot more complicated than everybody's going to make it out to be. But one of the chief things that needs to be understood about this whole BLM land seizure thing and the Texas border is that Greg Abbott is not totally serious when it comes to this lawsuit. It would not even come close to going to trial until after he's elected governor, because let's face it, we all know he's going to win. But we have to understand that when he says that Texas property owners will be defended and that the Texas property owners have the rights to this land, he's not being entirely truthful. While their deeds are lawful here in Texas, there is a whole slew of Supreme Court rulings in the past that basically say there's no way that he can win this lawsuit. And we're going to get into that tonight. There is a lot I want to talk about when it comes to this land snatch, so to speak. And it gets kind of muddled, but I think I've done a good job of kind of summing it all up here. The next stop for the BLM, like I said, North Texas border. The river is the border. It's 116 miles long, and the BLM has thrown around the number 90,000 acres. It's not that much. I can tell you that right now, not legally speaking. But the BLM is making the claim, first and foremost, that no one can own the land that the Texas landowners have deeds for because the BLM was not part of any sale of that land. It's important to note that the border wasn't decided until the 2000s-ish, and it's up to the Texas and Oklahoma governments to mark where that is. So Texas owns up to the vegetation, and there's some arguments for the high water mark, but everything I've seen says where the plant stops. So where that river becomes sand, it's not Texas anymore. And there are some exceptions at various river deltas where it forks and stuff like that. Or not deltas, but where it forks. And there are other exceptions where there's already towns, such as where it turns into the panhandle, that kind of thing. But it's all very technical. We don't need to get into any of that. What you need to understand is that Oklahoma owns to the middle of the river. Texas owns to the tree line, where the grass stops. So there's a swath of sandy land and like half a waterway, half a river, that is sort of no man's land. Now, arguably, Texas could be marking off this land. I haven't been there personally, so I can't tell you, and I'm not making any plans to venture up there and investigate myself. But it's no man's land, and it is technically federal land. And I say this because there's legal precedents to get there. Judge Napolitano was on Hannity last night talking about it. Greg Abbott and Perry were both on Fox last night. One was on, there was somebody on Kelly File, including a rancher from that area. That was on Greta last night. But it was all there, and they all came out and made these big statements, and the farmers are worried because they say the feds have been talking about what they're going to do with it, and they've been marking off land that these farmers say is theirs. We'll see how that pans out in the future because it's not happening anytime soon. But this brings up very important legal questions about if you own your land, and I've done a lot of research on that I want to kind of bring into the conversation because it's really terrifying what the government can do in terms of land ownership. And you should be afraid of it, and it's why the Bundy thing is so important. It's why the Texas border debacle, or non-debacle, if you will, is so important. It gets kind of murky in the legal sense, But all that you need to understand is that, A, the federal government cannot manage all of the land it owns. It's, billions of dollars behind in management fees, in projects that it's meant to do, and stuff like that. There's just no way for the federal government to own it. I mean, they own like 90% of Alaska, and they've done nothing with it, which is, of course, fine. It's a pristine wilderness, and quite frankly, the government has no business going into a lot of these natural parks and stuff like that. But it throws a lot of problems in the way of, businesses that want to expand, homesteaders that want to head out. If I wanted to go out into the wilderness of Alaska and build me a house, I could physically, but the government could kick me off at any point in time saying they own the land. So there's that. But, like I said, Napolitano was on Hannity last night, and he said something which I agree with, and I'm sure all of you agree with. The Founding Fathers did not believe in eminent domain. Now, eminent domain is basically what the government says when it wants to steal somebody's land. It's called an eminent domain thing. The Founding Fathers only believed in voluntary transactions. They didn't believe the government had the right to snatch up the land, and they wrote about this. And it's, you can Google that. It's not something that's hidden away. It's not something that's convoluted. The Founding Fathers were very clear, hey, government, you can't take people's land. And in the Constitution, there is a provision saying that, for the public good, they can use land to make like roads and hospitals and things like that. Now, it doesn't say specifically hospitals and roads in the Constitution, but that was the use. And of course, the Founding Fathers left it open for a reason, like hospitals, like schools, like roads, that kind of thing. But in today's society where it's, we have so many large areas and a lot of these big urban centers like, New York City, they want to snatch up an apartment building to build a new hospital, they can do that. And they don't have to pay you top dollar for your land either, or the building and stuff like that. And there is a swath through history and court cases that prove how ridiculous it is that government thinks it can take over land, and what it's going to do with it for that matter. Now, one thing that I think is interesting is that after all this hubbubaloo, I don't even know why I'm using that word, the BLM released a statement after that claiming the 146 acres in question were determined to be public land in 1986, and the 140 acres were at no time held in private ownership. Now, they're talking about a 1986 U.S. District Court ruling that says the 140 acres is public land. Now, basically, there was a farmer-rancher in Texas in 86, or before 86, that sued the government saying, this is my land, get off it, what do you think you're doing? And the government said, actually, we're going to just take your land. We don't care what you've been doing with it. We don't care how long you've had it. We don't care who you bought it from. We need it for something. Bet you it's just pasture land. But again, I'm not walking out there hundreds of miles to find it for you. So when I started digging, I wanted to see, what rights the government had to take people's land. Where do they derive it from? Where are the court cases protecting the people or not protecting the people? And I found some very scary information. Now, first off, I just want to hammer this home. The feds have claimed the riverbed in 1999 and of the Red River and north border of Texas, and Texas line ends at, quote, the vegetation line along the south bank of the Red River extending on a line from the 100th meridian east to Lake Texoma as the northern border of Texas. Now, that's the exact line. So basically, where the grass stops along the south bank of the Red River from the 100th meridian, that's, the latitude, longitude, the 100th meridian, east to Lake Texoma, and that's the northern border of Texas. And it's important to note that because when it comes to, how the whole thing is decided, that's what they're looking at to make a decision on this whole thing. Now, in 1994, the BLM said that depending on the outcome of the Red River Compact, which we know established that southern border I just read to you, there might be an additional 90,000 acres of land under BLM's control, despite the fact that most, if not all, of that acreage was owned, used, and cultivated by Texans. Now that is critically important when you're looking at this, because they basically said whatever the government decides on this case, we may take a whole bunch of land that used to belong to fine folks out in Texas. We'll continue this conversation after the break.
Hi, this is Missy Bordius. Join me as I share my womanly bits on the Conservative Feminist Show, 11 p.m. on Fridays, here on Vigilant Liberty Radio.
Talking about the northern border of Texas and the federal government getting involved in a dispute, possibly going to state claim on this land. Now, Attorney General Greg Abbott, who is the Republican candidate for governor, who, let's face it, is going to win, has sent a letter to the BLM, the feds, saying that he wants to know what exactly they're doing and what legal right they have to do it with portions of land along the northern border of Texas, not the Panhandle, but the squiggly part, Fort Worth, Dallas area across. And there is a lot of legal tape, so to speak, that you can look at to kind of see where this is going to go. Now, personally, I think Greg Abbott did this as a political stunt to bandwagon with the Bundy Ranch debacle, and for good reason. And he's also saying that, you know, the federal government can't take land from Texas landowners who have deeds to this land and have been working it for generations, etc. And he quoted the number 90,000. Now, there's a few things here. A, the government does have the right to take your land for basically any reason, and I'll tell you about that here in a bit. But this 90,000 acres that he's talking about was from a 1994 statement made by the BLM. The BLM said that, you know, this Red River Compact that was going on between Texas and Oklahoma and eventually Congress is, you know, subject for concern because depending on what they decide, an additional 90,000 acres might fall under BLM control, even though Texans own, use, and cultivate that land. Now, it's important to note that when the decision was made, it ended at the vegetation. The northern border of Texas stops where the grass stops along that river. Now, that river moves, you know, north and south as it, you know, erodes and acedes, moving around with time, basically. You know, that's how water works. Look at the Grand Canyon. So that's important. But that 90,000 acre number is an estimate that the BLM made years ago when that border was still under debate. So Greg Abbott citing this number from 94 is like a cherry pick. It's a big time cherry pick. And then the BLM released a statement yesterday talking about, 140 acres that Abbott, they're saying that Abbott's talking about 140 acres that was decided in the 80s. And that's not it either. To be real, it is a much thinner strip of land. I don't believe it amounts to 90,000 acres, but it's from the middle of the river on back to the grass line. It's basically sand and half a river. The other half's owned by Oklahoma. So this whole posturing thing that Abbott's doing and then the BLM is doing is not going to happen, and you're not going to see anything come of it because the federal government is still doing studies on what they should do with this tiny patch of land that they kind of sort of own. Now, they could, technically speaking, forbid anybody from fishing in it. They could prevent people from using it as a water supply. They could start dropping oil wells up and down the whole thing, pump Texas dry. There's lots of things they could do with it, if they're going to do any of it with their gigantic backlog and their anti-energy agenda and things of that nature is up for debate. More likely than anything, if something in the near future is going to happen, they're going to declare some sort of turtle to be endangered, or a trout, or a bass fish, or something in the river as endangered. There's a bullfrog, who knows? But that's the most likely solution with this liberal government, especially if Hillary Clinton wins. I could see her rubbing some salt in Texas and doing something with that land just as a kind of oomph after a victory. I mean, if she wins in 2016. But like I said, it's still not something that's going to happen in the near future. But what's really important is that Texans have deeds for this land, a lot of it. And although there was this border debate that happened in, around 2000, 2004, in mid-90s all the way up, it was like 99, 2000, 2004, that whole era, there was this debate on what would be done with the land because they didn't know where the border was. And these Texans have owned these deeds long before this whole thing happened. And so they've been farming and cultivating it and letting their cattle drink the water and all that stuff. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen to these people who have legal deeds for this. The government's basically just going to rule and say that these deeds don't count. Now, I know it sounds like that's not something that they should be able to do, but I'm going to go ahead and read for you a little bit of legal history to understand just exactly what the government is capable of doing when it comes to taking your land. There's a very controversial Supreme Court case from 2005. It's called Kelo versus City of New London. Now, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that general benefits a community enjoyed from economic growth qualified private redevelopment plans as a permissible public use under the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment. Basically, getting rid of anything, barriers or obstacles that stop them from efficient exploitation of, quote, agricultural and mineral-bearing land, or elimination of slums or large-scale title misallocation is allowed. So if you have a house right smack in the middle of where they want to put a salt mine, you're going to move. And if you don't, they're going to take your house, pay you pennies on the dollar for your land and your property, and you're going to expect bulldozers in the morning. And that's legal in the United States under this ruling. And a lot of rulings since have been interpreted from this and have basically said, if you can come up with any reason why government taking this land is beneficial to the city, the town, the neighborhood, they can do it. And that's, it's a blank check for taking your land. They don't even have to prove that it will be beneficial. They just have to think it will be. They just have to have an idea of how it could be used with you not living on it. And there are countless examples of this. Hannity had one last night. He was running reruns. Showed a World War II veteran, had been in his house for 40-something years. His town kicked him out of his house, paid him pennies on the dollar for it, because they wanted to build a condo there because they can get more taxes from a condo development than they can from one guy living in his house with his wife. World War II veteran. And he's exactly right. Except the Kelo case is honestly even more depressing than that in my mind. The city took the land from Kelo so they could give it to someone else to use to generate more taxes. The Fisker company was a big deal in this town. They had a research laboratory, and it provided 1,500 jobs. I believe it's 1,500. 1,500 jobs in the area, and the city of New London basically said that by taking Kelo's land, Suzette Kelo, by taking her house, kicking her out, and repossessing her land, basically, they could bring additional jobs to the area and generate additional tax revenue, and everything will be hunky-dory, and people will fart rainbows, and there'll be no more war if they kick this lady out of her house. Now, this was a very controversial Supreme Court decision at the time, and people all around the country were outraged about it. And, a lot of you guys listening, guys and gals, are young, and you don't know some of these Supreme Court decisions, some of the controversies in the past, and that's understandable. I mean, you don't learn, modern history in school. You don't learn things like this because they're still topics for discussion. So it's important to kind of review them. Now, I think a perfect example of why this was a bad decision is apparent in the dissenting decision. That's the 4 justices who disagreed with the majority. That was O'Connor, Rehnquist, Scalia, and Thomas. Generally speaking, Scalia and Thomas, big proponents of freedom. You can pretty much bet on them as an 8 out of 10 every time. 8 out of 10, they're good. They know what they're doing. Now, what they said was, any property may now be taken for the benefit of another private party, but the fallout from this decision will not be random. The beneficiaries are likely to be those citizens with disproportionate influence and power in the political process, including large corporations and development firms. This is basically crony capitalism at its absolute worst. This is a blank check for the government to come in, take your land, and give it to a corporation. They can repossess your house and put a Walmart there. They can repossess your entire neighborhood or your ranch and build a car factory, a plant, anything they want there. They could just kick you off your land and build a whole bunch of oil wells, so you don't get the rights to the oil that you were living on top of. And that's basically what they're saying here. And O'Connor wrote it, and he's right on the money. I mean, the fact that a Supreme Court justice ruled this at all is astounding. I mean, these people are supposed to be some of the most learned individuals in the world. They are supposed to be the most well-versed in the Constitution and what constitutional rights the people have. And for whatever reason, they believe that the federal government, the state government, and municipalities, counties, have the right to take your land and give it to anybody else for any reason, as long as they say it benefits the majority. America is supposed to be a country that believes in individual rights. We are supposed to be the freest nation on earth. We're supposed to be the place that people go when government takes their property, their life, and kicks them to the curb. This is the country that people go to escape communist crap like that. Sorry, comrade, it's not convenient for us to have you living here. We're going to put a factory there, and you're going to smile about it and thank God you live in our country. And that's what happens in the United States of America. And it's sanctioned by the court and approved by elected officials. Now, you have liberals that come out and say, well, don't elect officials, it'll take your land. You can't trust a politician. You can't trust any politician 100% of the time. And this is the reason, because you never know when they're going to say, oh, but, so many people will have jobs and we can get these homeless people off the street and just let them live in your house and we'll give you a little money for your trouble. You can just live somewhere else. But they're not going to ask your permission. And they don't have to. You could take them to court, but I just read to you the Supreme Court's going to rule against you. So really, what's the point? You already know what they're going to say. Now, Justice Thomas wrote something additional to the dissent, and I thought, it hits right along with what I was saying. He said, something has gone seriously awry with this court's interpretation of the Constitution. Though citizens are safe from the government in their homes, the homes themselves are not. You have a right to stay in your house and to be secure in your house, but you do not have the right to own your house. Now, many libertarians, myself included, will argue you don't own your house anyway because you've got to pay landlord Uncle Sam taxes, or rent, if you will, on any property you own. A lot of people will say, oh, but how will we afford the schools and the roads? And that's a whole nother argument for a whole nother day. But this right here just proves that when landlord Uncle Sam decides you're no longer living there, you're no longer living there. It doesn't matter how many deeds, how long you've been there. You can't even claim squatters' rights. I mean, in many states, and I believe across the country, if you live on land for 35 years, technically you're deeded the land that you've homestead. You could, break into somebody's ranch, live there for 35 years, and if they don't catch you or kick you off, it's yours legally, unless Uncle Sam says different. Now, the irony of this Supreme Court case is that the land that was taken from Suzette Kelo, is now a vacant lot, has been almost for a decade. Since this February, it's still vacant, so it's been almost 10 years. The bulldozing and purchasing of the property they stole cost the city of New London $78 million. And the company Fitzer that they were trying to appease with this whole thing left the town. They closed a research center. The town lost 1,500 jobs. They were relocated. And the jobs that city council promised, 3,169 new jobs and an estimated $1.2 million in new tax revenue, never happened. So they spent $78 million to take this lady's house from her and a few other people around the township and got nothing for it. They stole this land and left it a vacant lot. We'll have more when we come back.
This is David Silverman, president of American Atheists, and you are listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
Now let's be clear. Now let's be clear. Now let's be clear. There are no winners here. Now let's be clear.
All right, we're back. So we're talking a lot about the Supreme Court today and how messed up they are, basically. But I find it interesting because with all the huggabaloo, whatever that word is, about Justice Sotomayor being approved to the Supreme Court, I gotta say, she's not all bad. I mean, there are some decisions that she rules on where I just kind of want to pour cold water on her, but there are some she does rule on that I have to, I kind of want to give her a high five, which is really surprising from an Obama appointment. And, it kind of makes you rethink the partisan rhetoric for, approving her to the court. And I'm going to throw it out here. A lot of you that are, authoritarian types, I know there's a lot of neocons that listen, a lot of, staunch conservatives that listen. And, that's all good and fine. I understand where you're coming from on a lot of this stuff, but hear me out. This one is going to be controversial. Tuesday, the Supreme Court ruled that law enforcement officers may pull over and search drivers based solely on an anonymous tip. So basically, your buddy pisses you off, you call 911, tell him what kind of truck he's driving, his plate number, where he's at, say he's driving reckless, almost ran you off the road. That's what happened in this case. Well, police officers can find that car, that truck, don't have to see him speeding, swerving, or anything, can pull him over for no reason. Can even search his vehicle. And that's what this whole case was about. There was a traffic stop in North Carolina where officers pulled over a guy for reckless driving, even though there was no evidence after following the guy in his truck for several minutes. So the only reason that the cops in North Carolina pulled this guy over is because somebody anonymously called 911, said he ran him off the road, was driving drunk, reckless. Caller never said he was drunk, but implied that, saying a whole bunch of stuff about how reckless the guy was, swerving, dangerous, etc. While police officers pulled the guy over, they found weed in the car. But, and this is important, they found no evidence of reckless driving. So the guy was not swerving, was not, didn't have his lights off, didn't run stop signs or stoplights, wasn't speeding, wasn't going too slow. He was just driving along, minding his own business, and the cops pulled him over because somebody called 911 saying he had broken a traffic law at some point that day. And that was the only reason they pulled him over. Now, the court agreed that, yes, cops can pull people over based solely on anonymous tips to police. Don't have to give your name. Don't even have to be there to testify in court to say the guy ran you off the road. They can still pull him over. Now, Justice Scalia, like I said, he's one of my high odd horses, 8 out of 10 as far as getting it right, wrote a dissent with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Kagan, and Sotomayor. Now, I know what y'all are thinking, liberal with the pot. It's not about the pot. This is important, and I think you'll agree with me when you hear what the justices had to say. Now, they led off saying that whenever the Supreme Court rules on something about, law enforcement changes how it does business based on that ruling because they now have more or less authority. They know better, or worse for that matter, what they're allowed to do, what they are allowed to practice in terms of enforcing the law. And that's what this law does. And they cited specific examples. I'll read them to you. Law enforcement will now pull people over simply because of a tip with no traffic violations to back that up. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Now, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. They said it's, your right to as protection from, unnecessary searches and seizures, unwarranted searches and seizures. So they said it violates your right to travel freely without being molested in this country, because you do have that right. If you are driving, not breaking any of the traffic laws, police have no right to pull you over. Except now, they can just claim an anonymous tip came in, talking about you driving crazy at some point that day. And that's all they have to do. They continue on here. The tip was anonymous. Who reports a crime anonymously? Wouldn't they want to accuse and testify after catching the guy? Anonymous tips are suspect. Again, I'm paraphrasing here because it's really long. But, if you get ran off the road by somebody, wouldn't you want to press charges? If somebody almost kills you, drives you off the road into a ditch, you could have hit a tree, you could have flipped your car, you could have hit somebody walking on the side of the road. You think, the average individual, if you're calling in an anonymous tip like that, they almost ran me off the road, you're going to give your name so you can say, yeah, that jerk right there almost ran me off the road. Recognize his car. I almost died. I could have died. This guy's crazy. Put him in jail. But no, the tip was anonymous, and police, as a practice, according to the dissenting opinion here, Scalia wrote it, and I agree, anonymous tips like this are suspect. You should not believe fully that a crime was committed if the tip is anonymous, because it could very well be some jerk calling up, trying to get his buddy in trouble. Or, a coworker pissed him off, so they call the cops and get him pulled over for no reason. And that's basically what's happening here. Now it's allowed. Now, I'm going to read you another point here, and this there's a whole article on this on the Blaze if you want to read it. The AP wrote it, and I got a lot of this from them, but it's important. Here's the last part that I thought was, really hits home. Scalia said, this is a freedom-destroying cocktail consisting of 2 parts patent falsity. Basically, 2 lines of bullshit. The anonymous 911 reports of traffic violations are reliable so long as they correctly identify a car and its location. And 2, that a single instance of reckless or careless driving supports a reasonable suspicion of drunkenness. That's what this whole ruling does, which is what I've been explaining to you. A malevolent caller simply needs to anonymously call in a tip on a traffic violation, and that driver will be stopped, forcibly if necessary, by police, and the caller will face no consequences. Because even if the police trace the caller, pick your butt up for making a malevolent phone call, guy's not drunk or anything, it's your word against the drivers that he wasn't driving recklessly, and no court in the land can convict you of that. It's he said, she said, boy cried wolf. They can't send you to jail for that. So it basically legalized these potentially malevolent tips. I mean, we already have enough problems in this country in terms of, drinking and driving laws that go way too far, and that extends into the whole drug debate. And it's people like Mothers Against Drunk Driving and Puritan groups that led to prohibition and laid the groundwork for the mob to get started. And the mob laid the groundwork for the drug cartels. I mean, as a Southerner, I appreciate some moonshine, don't get me wrong. But you have to understand that these rulings, this decision here that was made, significantly impair your right to travel anywhere in this country. Because now, police can just claim that they got an anonymous tip about your car. They don't have to prove the tip was there. They don't even have to prove that it happened at all. They're just pulling you over, which is legal. Now, Scalia also wrote, drunk driving is a serious matter, but so is the loss of our freedom to come and go as we please without police interference. We are all now in danger of having our freedoms of movement curtailed. We now have to worry about police interference. And that's exactly right. Now, don't get me wrong. I love meeting a good police officer. There is nothing more refreshing than meeting an officer of the law who supports your constitutional rights and is genuinely just there to keep people safe and do good in the public. And there's a lot of guys that put their lives on the line and do that. But then you also got a lot that don't. And I know more of them than I know of good ones. I know, one good one, personally. And this is just anecdotal, but I know one good cop. Just the one. Now, that doesn't mean there's not more than one, but I personally have met one. And I have met at least 6 bad cops in my life. And that's just the ones I've met. Just this week, I was at the gas station picking up some drinks for a friend. And it was this Angry Orchard stuff. And it's like an apple cider thing. And some cops were in there, and they laughed. They said, Angry Orchard, what the hell's that? And they were laughing. And I said, it's apple cider. And they said, what kind of pansy drink is that? And I said, the apple kind, you might like it. And those cops said, is that a pig joke? And I said, no, sir, it's a tasty drink joke. And then they stared at me until I left. Because I guess they thought I was disrespectful for buying apple cider. Now, this is just one instance that happened to me this week. It does not include the many instances. This is especially, I never forget. I'll never forget. I got pulled over on the highway for avoiding an 18-wheeler. Now, I sped up to avoid that 18-wheeler because it was a 2-lane highway. I was merging on, and the overpass was high. I couldn't see the guy. Rather than hit the brakes, I sped up and moved across and got out of his way. Cop pulled me over, and he said, you were speeding? I was like, yes, sir, I was avoiding that 18-wheeler. And the guy says, okay. He writes me a ticket, and he goes, Happy Thanksgiving, and laughs at me. And so, it just continues on and on and on. And as many of you know, I work in the news business, and so I spend a lot of my time looking through police reports to see, what kind of crime stuff is going on in my neck of the woods. And there was something today. I called the police department as soon as I read this because I had to look into it. There was a guy in College Station, Texas, who got pulled over for something, and he didn't have insurance, so he got a ticket for that. And then he got pulled over for not wearing his seatbelt. Or he got pulled over and then got ticketed for not wearing his seatbelt. Allegedly. And then, you're not going to believe this shit. Apparently, this guy made the decision to start riding his bicycle because I guess he got tired of getting tickets. So he's riding his bicycle down the road. Police officers pull him over on his bicycle and write him a ticket for not having the proper reflectors on his bicycle. So this guy apparently makes the decision, well, I guess I might as well drive because I can't even ride a bicycle without getting in trouble. And then he gets popped again for no insurance, and then he gets popped a fifth time for no failure to get insurance. So this poor guy, he's probably a really poor dude, can't even afford reflectors for his bicycle, gets popped twice. He's just trying to drive around. There's no traffic violations on his record, no speeding, no running stop signs, no driving drunk, nothing. The guy's just driving. And he gets popped for no insurance, and then he gets popped for no seatbelt. And if you live in the country, and College Station is the country, let's be clear, a lot of times you don't wear a seatbelt. There's a lot of people with hunting trucks that don't even have seatbelts. Let's be real here. So when I see police pulling over a guy for riding a bicycle without the proper reflectors, you can't help but wonder if there's not something better they could be doing with their time. And in College Station, probably not. I would maybe suggest giving free breathalyzers outside of a bar so people don't drive drunk, but that's just me. We'll have more when we come back.
Hi, this is Jonah Goldberg from National Review, and you're listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
All right, we're back. Now, I want to do one more note on the police shenanigans that I've encountered, because there is one more story I came across this week from police activity, if you will, that was a little irksome. Now, like I've said, and I'll say it again, there are lots of great cops who do a great job protecting and serving, and there's many who signed up for all the right reasons, but there are so many police officers out there who really ought to reconsider what it is they're doing. Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, they're just doing their job, and these people are breaking the law, and it doesn't matter what the law is, they broke it, and they need to pay. That's nonsense. There is no reason in this world for a lot of the things that people get ticketed for. And a perfect example of that is just when you see people just being people, and your first thought as a cop is, well, they're breaking the law, so I need to go write them a $200 ticket. You need to stop being a cop. You need to go be a mall security guard. You need to get rid of your badge, and you need to never work in law enforcement again. And again, a lot of people are going to say, they're just doing their job, and it's their job. No, look, I'm sorry, but enforcing unjust laws is not your job description. Cops are there to protect and serve. Now, I know that there's already been rulings, and there's plenty of evidence that they're there to protect and serve the city, and so enforcing unjust laws that the city passes is part of their shtick. But in reality, a good cop knows when they're supposed to just tell people to cut it out without issuing big fat tickets for like bike reflectors. And quite frankly, they're making it hard for Darwinism and nature to kind of take over sometimes. And more importantly than that, there's just a lot of stuff that goes on that is not police business. I mean, we pay these guys a decent salary, and they put their lives on the line in a lot of instances, and it's just sad when they get put on the record doing stuff that is just ridiculous. Now, it's great when you see cops doing stuff like going out and, playing basketball with kids and just serving the community and doing a great job in that aspect. But you gotta avoid the nonsense. And I'm going to tell you about this last one here. I saw a report of a girl who got arrested for saying effing a-holes in a parking garage. I don't know if you've ever been on a college campus or tried to find a parking spot or navigate a parking garage with a bunch of college students, but it is one of the most harrowing driving experiences you can have. Now, I know I got a lot of listeners overseas who deal with conditions that are arguably much worse. But in terms of in America, a bunch of really dumb 21 and unders trying to find a parking spot is one of the most terrifying places you can be as a driver. Now, I did it myself for years in college, and I know, and a lot of my college friends that are listening right now, a lot of my college listeners, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. You guys and gals hate finding parking in the garage because there's a line of 25 morons waiting on one spot, and they're all honking and driving like idiots and not looking around corners, and they should not probably even have a driver's license. But my point is, if you've ever been in a parking garage, you yourself have dropped F-bombs at least 5 times. If you have been in a college parking garage during college, you have screamed F and A-holes. You've done it. And I've done it many times, but I never got arrested for it. And I read a police report yesterday about a girl who got arrested for screaming F and A-holes in a parking garage on a college campus. Now, I don't know what officer made that arrest, but shame on you. You're in that parking garage. You know what a bunch of stupid teenagers driving looks like. You know how ridiculous a college parking garage is. When you hear somebody scream F and A-holes, go look for the person they're screaming at. Go look at the person that just stole a parking spot. Go look at the person that just turned a corner without checking the brakes, without, looking to see if another car was coming. Go look for that person. And if the parking garage is empty, it's May. It's April. And in April, it's getting close to finals here. So if you hear a college student scream a few curse words, maybe just pat them on the back, tell them it'll be okay. Maybe do that instead of arresting them and taking them to jail and giving them a criminal record for being stressed out in a college parking garage, one of the top 10 most stressful places in the world, right behind, let's say, battlefield, courtroom where you're on trial, and a Democrat convention. Yeah? Sound good? Okay, cool. Now, I want to talk about the new Georgia gun law that's passed. Now, down in Georgia, they've passed this new law that they say has expanded the Second Amendment rights of the individuals in that state. Republican Governor Nathan Deal signed legislation yesterday that expanded the gun rights of the citizens in Georgia. People with concealed handgun licenses can now bring guns into bars and government buildings that don't have certain security measures. They can, religious leaders are now able to decide for themselves whether or not they want guns in their establishments. For those of you who don't know, when you have a concealed handgun license, you can pretty much take it anywhere except for school campuses, government buildings, and like hospitals. But generally speaking, any building that doesn't want you to have a gun there has to put a sign in the window that has a gun with the line through it. It has to be a certain size, at a certain height, with the city ordinance code on it that says, quote, we do not want firearms on this premises, etc., etc. There's a very specific legal definition of what they have to do to prohibit you from having Second Amendment rights on their premises. Now, a lot of liberty-minded people say, well, they don't have the right to take away my right to defend myself, etc. But in reality, a business has the right to tell people they can't arm themselves. Now, and that's just on that property. If you don't want to go to that business, I fully encourage you to take your patronage elsewhere and vote with your dollar. I personally will not eat at a restaurant that has that gun prohibition in the window. Even if it's not up to code, not the legal size, not in the right area, I still won't shop there because at some point somebody said, I don't want people to defend themselves in my establishment. And to me, I would rather break the law than be caught unarmed in a situation where I need to have a gun. I would rather be alive than dead. So that's just me. And in order to avoid breaking the law, I just don't go to these places. I don't eat there. I don't shop there. I'm not going to not carry. And that's That's just the way it is. I mean, even when I don't have my license, I have, a knife on me. I'm not going to be unarmed. I'm not going to be a victim. And, most liberty-minded people, most conservatives are that way. You're not going to be a victim. You're not going to have some punk rob you of your wallet. You're going to, put a few holes in their chest. And you'd be right in doing so. So this bill allows for religious leaders to decide if you can carry or not. You put the sign in the window, can't carry. Your pastor says you can. Amen. It also allows schools to decide if some officials can carry. Now, we already have this in Texas, and a lot of other states have constitutional carry where that's allowed. But they left it up to school officials, so they didn't butt in and say, if a teacher has a CHL and they want to be armed, they can. It's not how it works. To renew your CHL license, you don't have to get your fingerprints done. You only got to get them done to register. This is all in Georgia, keep in mind. This doesn't apply to my Texan listeners, or any of the other states for that matter. But it's interesting, so just keep listening. Georgia is prohibited from keeping a database of anyone with CHLs, and there is no more state license for gun dealers. So they don't have a big registry of who's registered as having a concealed handgun license, so cops can't run your driver's license and see that you got a CHL, and at least not at the state level. Federal levels remains to be seen. But arguably this law would prohibit Georgia from collecting that information, but that's a whole legal debate we don't need to get into yet. And gun dealers, they only have to get the federal license from the ATF, which is standard stuff. People carrying without a concealed handgun license who defend themselves will not be prosecuted for carrying a gun illegally. Now, this is important because Democrats are saying, gangbangers with illegal guns that shoot up somebody, it can say it's self-defense and they can get away with killing somebody. That's a lot. That's a load is what it is. That's baloney. You can call shenanigans on that one. It says that you can carry and you don't have to worry about having your CHL. So in Georgia, if you don't have a CHL, you can still pack that concealed handgun on your hip and not worry about it because they can't arrest you for not having a license if you're caught defending yourself. And it's not like you're going to get caught in Georgia somewhere else without. You're not going to get popped having a gun unless you're using it, basically. And that's we'll get to that here in just a second. Hunters can use suppressors and silencers. I was always taught they were just suppressors, as long as they tell the landowner. So if you're out hunting deer and you've got a suppressor on your 30-06, where would you even get one? You can use it legally. Apparently it was illegal before to silence your weapon, but as long as you're telling somebody, you can, as long as you tell the landowner and they agree, you can use it, which is great if you're doing some kind of game hunting where you're going to fire multiple shots and you don't want to alert all the game in the area. That's all good and fine. I understand that. I don't really think it's that big of an issue, but, Democrats are hooping and hollering about all of it, so it's just interesting to note all of the details. Now, this is a little bit more controversial, so we're going to take a look at it. Now, I will talk about it. CHLs that are revoked can be renewed. You can apply for renewal after 3 years. So if for whatever reason you get your license revoked, your concealed handgun license, after 3 years of having it revoked, you can apply to get it again. Now, a lot of people are saying, this, leaves it open for criminals to get it after they've committed some offense that gets it revoked. Or, if you get popped for DUI, then 3 years later you can get a gun. You can be drunk and armed. Look, I don't care if somebody's, say that somebody gets popped for having a joint. And so because they're, they had a felonious amount of marijuana on them or something, they're no longer legally allowed to defend themselves. Because that's basically what the Democrats are saying. That, if some people commit crimes, they're no longer allowed to defend themselves. Now, I do agree that, violent felons should not be allowed to possess guns, period. That's what background checks are for, and gun shops are required to do them. But the idea that they can renew their license after it's been revoked is just, if somebody makes a mistake on something stupid and minor, after a few years of cleaning themselves up, they can get it. That being said, they're still on probation or they've repeat offended or anything like that. The state's not going to approve their license. It's it's not really a big concern. They're just demagoguing the issue. And I think that's important to note, because if you run into any liberals, they're like, oh, I can't believe all these gun-toting rednecks in Georgia. You can be like, well, actually, it's pretty standard boilerplate stuff. Now, this, to me, is the most interesting part, because it's the most freedom-minded part. If officers see someone carrying a weapon concealed, they cannot ask to see a concealed handgun license unless they are in the process of committing a crime. Now, this, to me, is very interesting, because carrying a gun, having a concealed handgun, does not in any way constitute a crime. It is not reasonable suspicion. It is not probable cause to search, question, and get ID from you. It's not. So when a police officer sees someone carrying and they stop you and say, excuse me, why do you have a gun? Why are you carrying? Is there any reason you feel the need to have a gun? You see a lot of videos like this online, people getting stopped by police and asked, why are they carrying? Why do you feel the need to be armed? Or are you thinking you're going to run into any trouble? What is your reasoning behind this? And it basically turns law-abiding citizens who they don't want to rely on police to get there in 15 minutes to save their life from defending themselves. It discourages American citizens from defending themselves. So I personally think it's very sad that Georgia felt the need to put this into the law, but I am glad it's there, because it stops people from being harassed for simply trying to exercise their Second Amendment rights and defend themselves. And you see this all the time, like with the case out in Temple, where the master sergeant was pulled over for, or stopped for having a rifle, and the cops illegally disarmed him, that kind of thing. All right. That's it for our show tonight. Hope you've had a great week. We will see you next time. My name is Dustin Hoyt. This is America Our Way on the Vigilant Liberty Radio Network, and I will see you next time.